Welcome to One-on-One with B'nai B'rith International. I'm your host, CEO Dan Mariaschin. We appreciate your spending some time with us today. Today's conversation is a special one. Joining me from London are B'nai B'rith UK's Jeremy Havardi, who heads our London Bureau of International Affairs, and independent advisor to the UK government on anti-Semitism, Lord John Mann. I'd now like to welcome Jeremy to say a few words to introduce our guest.
Absolutely. Lord John Mann is a former Labour politician who currently serves as an independent member in the House of Lords and is the UK government's advisor on anti-Semitism. Prior to his current roles, he was elected as a Member of Parliament for the Nottinghamshire constituency of Bassetlaw in 2001, a community he served until 2019. Prior to becoming an MP, he was chairman of the National Organisation of Labour Students and then served as head of research and education for the Amalgamated Engineering and Electrical Union. In 2015, he called on Jeremy Corbyn, MP, not to stand as Labour leader, and in the coming years would repeatedly declare that he had no confidence in Corbyn as leader. Corbyn did remain Labour leader until April 2020. For many years, both inside and outside of Parliament, Lord Mann has taken a vigorous stand against all manifestations of anti-Semitism. In Parliament, he was chair of the all-party Parliamentary group against anti-Semitism. In an interview in 2016, he declared, "If Labour cannot combat racism, then we are nothing, and racism always includes anti-Semitism. If we cannot do that now, then we have no reason to exist." A year later, he called Corbyn a man who claims he's dedicated his entire life to racism, but wasn't prepared to make a speech exclusively, explicitly just on anti-Semitism. One of his most famous public interventions came in 2016 when he confronted veteran Labour MP and former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, calling him, quote, a Nazi apologist after Livingstone had stated that Hitler had supported Zionism. He's compiled a book, Anti-Semitism, the World's Oldest Hatred. In appointing him as the government's special advisor on anti-Semitism, former Prime Minister Theresa May said this of Lord Mann: "John Mann is, without exception, a key voice on this matter. He has frequently campaigned in the House of Commons on this issue and has tirelessly used his role as a politician to speak out on behalf of victims of anti-Jewish racism." So today we'll focus on developments in the UK regarding anti-Semitism and the government's efforts to tackle it, challenges concerning anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, as well as the ways in which the UK provides best practice on an international level. We'll also talk about the alarming rise in anti-Semitism across Europe and how the current unrest in the US has resonated so strongly in the UK. So I'd now like to give the floor to you, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for your introduction and for setting the stage to today's discussion. As Jeremy said today, Lord Mann and I will focus on developments in the UK regarding anti-Semitism and the government's efforts to tackle it, challenges concerning anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, as well as ways in which the UK provides best practices on an international level. We'll also talk about the alarming rise of anti-Semitism across Europe and how the current unrest in the US has resonated so strongly in the UK. So now I'd like to welcome our distinguished guest, Lord John Mann. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Well, let's get right into the conversation. My first question has to do with the rise of conspiracies as the coronavirus rages on. As you well know, the virus has brought with it novel variants of long-standing anti-Semitic tropes and conspiracy theories targeting Jewish people and other minorities. As advisor to the UK government on anti-Semitism and as a longtime ally of the Jewish community, how has the current situation affected your agenda and your portfolio? And for context, just how prevalent have anti-Semitic conspiracy theories been in the UK during the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, I can reveal that I've sent a note to government in detail about the current situation. And in that note, I've said that in my assessment, there's been no discernible increase in anti-Semitism in the UK during the crisis, but that government needs to be ultra prepared for when this rise will come. And my prediction to them is, and has been, that will come with the economic downturn. In other words, at the moment, and there's still anti-Semitism there, of course, but no increase. But the moment we hit the economic downturn, which undoubtedly the world is facing, then as people look for the scapegoats, we will see, in my prediction, a vehement and significant increase in the rise in anti-Semitism. And I've asked the UK government to prepare itself and be alert for that, to ensure the systems and people are in place, which I believe they are, but the will is there, and that we don't miss it as this upturn comes because of other priorities. So far, so good. But that's not good news in the longer term, because the economic recession, as it breaks out in a much bigger way, will lead, in my prediction, to a vehement, significant increase in anti-Semitism, and we need to be ready for that.
Well, let's take a step back and your journey to becoming the UK government's independent advisor on anti-Semitism. As Jeremy mentioned, you became first a Labour Party member of Parliament in 2001 for the constituency of Bassetlaw, where you remained as an MP until October of last year. How did your personal upbringing and political activism, always interested in how someone like yourself comes to a position like this over the years, how did that lead you to have such a specific focus on combating anti-Semitism? And how difficult has it been for you to have resigned from the Labour Party following nearly 40 years of Labour Party activism in various forms?
Well, you know, I live in the locality I represented with virtually no Jewish constituents. I mean, by virtually none, I mean, I could identify perhaps 4 people out of 100,000. So not literally none, but as near as you can get. So I wasn't brought up with Jewish people. I wasn't brought up near a Jewish community at all. But I was well brought up. And I've discovered in my research over this lockdown some, I regard it as rather good news. 1936, in the city I was born, the city of Leeds in England, the people of Leeds turned out and routed the fascists. It was the biggest defeat the fascists had pre-war. And what I've been able to ascertain for certain is that my family, as I suspected, were present in that routing, were active participants in removing the fascists from the city. And so there's a long tradition in my family of standing up against racism. And as an elected political leader, which until the end of last year, for better or for worse, I was, it is my judgment that the definition of leadership is that political leaders must stand up for what is right and must oppose what is wrong. And therefore, for me as a political leader, to stand up against anti-Semitism should be seen as natural, normal, and rather mundane. And that's how I've seen it until I've taken this role on, which in essence means that rather than spend 5% of my time fighting anti-Semitism, I now spend 95% of my time. And hopefully the experience and expertise that I've built up can assist that fight, both in the UK and internationally, and particularly the perspective that I've always said non-Jews must be at the front of the battle. Not telling the Jewish community what to do, but when the battle's to be had, we need to take the blows first. We need to be there, not alongside, but at the front. It's our duty to do so, and it's our duty to society and civilization and democracy to do so. So I've always called on any political leader to do their little bit. And I've attempted to do mine. And if I could just clarify, I resigned taking the Labour whip in Parliament in order to do this role, but I refused to leave the Labour Party. I was born into this party, and they'd have to remove me, which they're not going to do. And I will continue to challenge the Livingstones, the Corbyns and others until these people have no space, no room, no voice on the left, in the Labour Party, or anywhere near the mainstream of British politics, because their message has been dangerous and remains dangerous. And we shouldn't think that, even though Corbyn et al. Have lost, that these people have disappeared. They've merely been shunted to the sidelines. We need to close them down every time they give any credence to anti-Semitism.
Well, I can tell you in terms of standing up with those who fight anti-Semitism, Lord Mann, I've been at several conferences where you have spoken on anti-Semitism, and I know that people would say, you know, on the program, John Mann is on the program today. You have a reputation that far exceeds just the country that you were born in and that you're living in. But I want to talk a little bit more about the Labour Party's anti-Semitism crisis. The seriousness of the situation, of course, well documented, and you've just spoken about it, with significant pain having been inflicted on Britain's Jewish community during Corbyn's Labour leadership. And in May of 2016 already, you wrote an article in the Jewish Chronicle entitled, "If Labour cannot combat racism, then we are nothing." Now, looking back at your words now, how do you think Labour has fared in tackling the anti-Semitism problem? And more importantly, I guess, at the current moment, and from your perspective, is the Labour Party now moving in the right direction on fighting anti-Semitism within the party 2 months plus into the party's new leadership?
Well, ethically, morally, and electorally, it's been a catastrophe for the Labour Party. One, of course, I predicted, and the British people at the election rejected anti-Semitism, and the best example of that, in fact, wasn't the crushing defeat of Corbyn, which of course was there, but was the two leading outriders, George Galloway and Chris Williamson, notorious in the stridency of their approach, were both humiliated by the electorate, both lost their deposit, in other words, got less than 2% of the vote. The British people rejected anti-Semitism, and so we should be celebrating that. We should also be taking, I think, a lot of confidence, not complacency, but confidence in the approach that the new Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has made. He has clearly decided to make his mark by cleansing the Labour Party of this cancer. And so far, so good. I wait to see the absolute conclusion of what he does. But so far, what we've seen is clear, unambiguous messages, changes in structure, change of politics. And a number of the leading anti-Semites have already run away and quit the Labour Party, which shows that this approach is being believed. So there's a long way to go. But I think the signs at the moment are very positive. And the British Jewish community is, without question, far more confident of its future than it was last December. And I think enjoying the moment that it's on the ascendancy again, knowing that the British people's rejected anti-Semitism, and seeing that the main opposition party is now taking decisive action. It's exactly what's needed, and it's very powerful, and it resonates well beyond this country.
Well, in recent years, the discussion on anti-Semitism in the UK has, of course, been largely focused on Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, and rightly so. But far-right extremist groups have also become more mainstream, it seems, in Britain. What type of threat do these groups pose to the British community, British society at large, and other frequent victims of far-right attacks?
Well, I mean, often we can't determine initially whether it's the far right or the far left behind extremism, because the conspiracy theories that you referred to earlier, Dan, they're shared by both. There's a huge crossover. The symbolism is increasingly shared by both. And while superficially they hate one another, they seem to come together when it comes to anything to do with Israel, anything to do with Zionism, and much to do with Jews. Therefore, the dangers of the far right. I mean, I've had people put in prison. I've had friends who've had murder attempts on their lives, who I've had to support and assist. This is big league stuff in this country, what's been going on. I've had violent threats from the far left as well as the far right. And so this has been pretty hair-raising in the last few years, and it remains so to this day. When you go on anywhere near a demonstration these days, if the far right and the far left are there and you're Jewish, or you're identified and been any way empathetic to the Jewish community, or in any way sympathetic to the existence of the state of Israel, then you're a target. And it can be dangerous, and it is dangerous. And so there's a lot more needed. I don't think this is a British problem. I think this is a problem internationally. And I think the internet has connected up these extremists and emboldened them. But they are a major threat. And, I see the far left and the far right as two sides of the same coin when it comes to anti-Semitism. That's my experience. Both must be challenged. And whether you or I sit more on the left or the right of politics, we must challenge both with equal vehemence. And that approach, I think we've really got on top on in this country, in working cross-party, working together to challenge the extremes of the right, the left, and to challenge the Muslim Islamic extremes who can fall between the two as well.
Yeah, I'd like to. You're absolutely right. I mean, this upsurge in anti-Semitism in recent years has been oftentimes referred to as the perfect storm from the left, from the right, as you've said, and there's a convergence, oftentimes on Israel, but not only. And then it's the perfect storm of the left, the right, and Islamic extremism. Would you comment on that? And are you working? Are there Muslim groups or individuals, leaders that you work with in combating that particular strain of anti-Semitism?
There are indeed. Had a major event with one of the leading imams just last week, and in it we agreed that he should be coming into Jewish community forums and having dialogue directly, not indirectly, but directly, and perhaps sometimes with an element of difficulty with the Jewish community. And I, plus leading figures from the Jewish community, should be doing the same in the Muslim community. And I don't just mean amongst the long-standing partners, the people who've been reliable and outspoken for a long time, friends of ours. I mean out in the mainstream, in the difficult areas, in the difficult communities, in those that don't have that exposure to the Jewish community, who have prejudices about Israel, who have ignorance, a lack of education on these matters, and whose viewpoint and perspectives will need challenging. And I welcome that, and I would expect as well that they would be challenging me and us on whether we understand the issues and problems that the Muslim community faces, and not least from the extreme right. That dialogue, I think, will be very healthy, but it's vital. Pretending that there's no problem there is a recipe for disaster into the future. Muslim anti-Semitism has to be challenged at least as much as that from the far left and the far right.
Well, more than any one tactic, we know that the fight against hate must involve changing the minds of young people. This is clear. This is a generation, now 2 generations, raised on the internet, subject to the forces of social media. To that end, Holocaust Holocaust education in the UK is required, but not necessarily taught strongly enough, perhaps, as we would like. And as is true in the United States, the study of racism in the UK is perhaps not always taught with as much emphasis as some of us would like. Do you think that there's more that the British education system can do to remove hatred and prejudice? What type of relationships have you forged with schools and universities about their curricula? And what is your assessment of Holocaust education in British schools today?
Well, Holocaust education in Britain is far more effective, far more widespread than it was 10 years ago. So we have seen a significant improvement in funding, in systems, but there's a long way to go. And I have a fear, because we've been very reliant on survivors and their witness testimony. We will reach a period in the not too distant future when there are no witness testimonies other than those recorded by camera and therefore part of history. And that's a dangerous moment. And we need to be preparing now for that. Because when we talk of the Holocaust, we will then be talking history as opposed to witness. And I think that's very different, no less legitimate. And it's crucial, therefore, that the educational content is consistent, it's delivered everywhere, and it's delivered to a very high standard. I think we have made significant progress, but I think there's a lot more to go. And I'm appointed for 5 years by the Prime Minister. Over that 5 years, this is a huge priority to get right. If I fail to do that, if we fail to do it, then future generations will pay a heavy price. So I think 5 years is a reasonable time scale. And of course, we have great organizations and great people who are far more experts in how to do this than I could ever dream to be. My role will be to make sure that senior politicians and Parliament are aware of what they need to do in terms of the resources, the legislative systems, the priority given. And I think it's a major issue for all of us. And may I place on record my thanks and the credit due to your organisation for the work and priority you have given. You've been for us incredibly important partners. And I think in the next few years, you'll become even more so. And so the more we can learn and tap into your expertise, the better we can do our job. That's why we look forward to working with you far more closely than we have, even though we have worked very well together in the past. We need to up our game in partnership. That's my request to you good selves, because you have a vital role to play. We want to be there alongside you.
Well, we accept your invitation to work together even more closely. And, Lord Mann, you're absolutely right about the message of survivors, which, of course, has really sustained Holocaust remembrance for all of these years. But Europe, for example, just recently observed the 75th anniversary of VE Day, the end of World War II in Europe. But as we become farther removed from the end of the war, we see efforts to rewrite history growing exponentially all over the world, and Holocaust denial and revisionism are becoming more and more common. I mean, when I entered this field 40 years ago, and I used to speak about this issue, I would say there will come a moment when there will no longer be people who have the tattoos on their arms or who experience this terrible barbarity. And then what? Then we have to continue this story. We have to continue about the facts, the details in Holocaust education. So this is not just a British challenge, of course. This is a challenge for all of us to find ways to transition from the first person testimonies to the kind of Holocaust education that really is very invasive and intrusive, I should say, into the system, so that so the revisionists don't win at the end of the day. I just want to talk about, if we can, because we're getting toward the close of the program. The UK has been an IRA member, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, known by its acronym IRA, since IRA was founded back in 1998. And back in December of 2016, the UK adopted the widely accepted IRA working definition of anti-Semitism, was one of the first countries in the world to do so. Can you describe the ways in which the adoption of the IRA definition has been a useful tool in your role in the UK as an independent advisor on anti-Semitism? And how has adopting IRA's definition helped in Britain's fight against anti-Semitism at an institutional level or a societal level?
It's absolutely vital. There's no bigger priority. A clear, agreed definition of anti-Semitism makes it easier to fight anti-Semitism. It links absolutely directly into our last subject, the future of education in schools and in universities. Having a definition is vital to that. And my plea to those who are watching in, this definition's been adopted by governments. I think we were the first government, in fact, to adopt it in the UK. Parliament's adopted it. We got 641 out of 643 members of Parliament. So only 2 refused to sign the declaration. Every political party signed up to it who's represented in Parliament. So we've got the political establishment on board. We've been giving them a lot of guidance and advice with success in how to use it. But this isn't a tool simply for politicians and government. So we are asking every British university to adopt it and use it on its campuses, and we are succeeding in getting them to sign up. We've asked every British football club to sign it and use it with its players, its staff, its stewards, and crucially, its fans, the spectators, and those watching on TV and in other forms. And we expect, and we're getting, big name football clubs behind it. We'd like to spread that across Europe. We've had a lot of dialogue with German football clubs. I'm very confident there. We've opened it up with Spanish and Italian and North American football and other sports clubs. If civic society institutions use this definition, then that's a powerful sign of reassurance and solidarity with the Jewish community. But it's also a practical, pragmatic tool to challenge and defeat anti-Semitism. And so it is absolutely at the top of my list in terms of actions required. And every day we're pressing this forward. And if it wasn't for the lockdown, we'd have had a series of big announcements to make that we're just holding back to slightly calmer times to show more organisations in civic society adopting the definition, and it will become a cascade in this country. And I hope then across Europe, as civic society gets behind it, that becomes a very powerful arm in our tool of fighting anti-Semitism.
Well, what you just said is so important. And, you know, I think of Brexit, and I know of the role that you have played, not just in the UK, but you have played internationally in the fight against anti-Semitism. And we certainly hope that your voice will continue to be unhindered by any of the changes that Brexit might bring, and that your role and that of your colleagues who believe in what you're doing and support what you're doing will be able to continue to work throughout Europe, because the problems of anti-Semitism clearly are global. We've talked about from the left, from the right, and from Islamic extremism. This is a global phenomenon. And Europe has been the epicenter of a lot of this, and we certainly hope that your role will continue, and you'll continue to speak out when it comes to anti-Semitism in other places, or to take your best practices to apply them or offer them to be applied in other places.
Well, we're re-energizing the International Parliamentary Coalition that I formed over 10 years ago with Erwin Kotler of Canada, and which, of course, your organization played a huge role in the very successful Canadian conference, and where you were the partner organization to us in that, where we had politicians from 62 countries. Well, the ICCA is having to take on the remit of helping to push through the IRA definition through parliaments and into civic society. And so that is getting re-energized at the moment. And so working with B'nai B'rith is a top priority. You're a big, well-structured, well-thought-out organization of huge credibility. It's a key part of my desire to continue the relationship with you. We will do everything we can to work with you, and we look forward to taking every opportunity. These kind of partnerships, we can only do our small bit, but we promise we will. But doing it in partnership is the way to make these small bits into much bigger, much more effective ways of combating this curse.
Indeed. Just one last question. Here we're at the close of the program. In this week of current civil unrest, couple of weeks actually here, why do you think that the race issue has resonated so strongly in the UK? And do you think that this has helped to forge bonds perhaps between Jews and other minorities in Britain, or has it just merely led to conspiracy theories and other anti-Semitic manifestations? What's your take? Because this is actually something which is actually in play right now.
It's led to both. I mean, there are conspiracy theories abounding everywhere. I think we've avoided in this country the idea that it's the Jews who are responsible. But I repeat what I said at the beginning, the economic crisis that is coming because of COVID and the stopping of the world economy is the danger point. And therefore, we need allies. We need allies in the Black community working with us. We need to be their allies. Otherwise, minorities will be picked off. And they'll be picked off in the same way that's happened through history. We need to learn those lessons of history. Nobody knows the lessons of history more painfully, but more accurately than the Jewish community and its communal organizations. That's why you have a responsibility to lead. And we have a responsibility, those of us involved at the national level in politics, to be there alongside you. And occasionally, when it gets nasty, to be there in front of you. So let's carry on doing that.
Well, we're grateful that the Mann family was out in the street in Leeds in 1936 That says a lot about you. It really does. Lord Mann, thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
Many thanks to Lord John Mann and our own Jeremy Havardi for joining the program today. And thank you for tuning in to One-on-One with B'nai B'rith International. If you like what you've heard, make sure you never miss a show by subscribing to the B'nai B'rith YouTube channel. Be sure to visit our website, b'naibrith.org, to learn about our work, like us on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter. For my guests, Lord John Mann and B'nai B'rith UK's Jeremy Havardi, I'm Dan Mariaschin. We'll see you again soon.